Welcome, everybody, to another segment of the Real Mike Pittman Podcast. We've been on a hiatus for a while, and we're back with a show today featuring Dean Olsen from the Illinois Times newspaper in Springfield, Illinois. About a month ago, Dean did a story about the income equality in Springfield, Illinois, as it relates to black and whites, and that Springfield was number 2 in the country based on population factors as it relates to the gap in income between blacks and whites. And I thought this would be an interesting story to bring Dean on and to talk about the research that he did on this and some of the findings and some of the things moving forward and maybe some of the plans that the city of Springfield has to try to address some of these inequalities. And so I'm going to go ahead and Dean, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would, please.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Mike. I've been at the Illinois Times for about 3.5 years. I lived with my family in Springfield since 1999. I first came here, covered state politics in the state capitol for 4 years during George Ryan's term. And then I became the health reporter at the State Journal Register. I worked there for about 20 years. And then during the pandemic, I worked also another year in the State House when everything was locked down. And then in 2022, I went to work for the Illinois Times. I'm a native of Chicago. I grew up in the south suburb of Chicago, and I've previously worked at the Peoria Journal-Star in Peoria, Illinois, the Journal and Courier in Lafayette, Indiana, and the Times of Northwest Indiana in Hammond. I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I was the first person in my extended family to go to college, and I always liked to write. And I started writing at the school newspaper, and I've been writing ever since.
A very extensive career as far as writing. And how was it making the transition from a daily newspaper such as the State Journal Register to the Illinois Times? That you find you have more flexibility, more freedom, not being under a big corporate banner, if you will, as opposed to maybe some of the more flexibility when you have a local ownership?
Well, it was exciting to work at the Daily. Keep in mind that when I started working there we had 30 to 35 reporters in the newsroom. We were owned by the Copley news chain. The finances in journalism were a lot better. Over the years, people have left because of a lack of pay raises and because of layoffs. And so when I left, I was one of 3 reporters. So try to think about any industry that could survive when you go down 90% in the number of people. And that's been common across the country. And Illinois has lost the biggest number of newspaper journalists in the country. It's lost 90% of all the jobs, journalists in the past 20 years. So that's this decline in local news. There have been studies that say that it leads to more corruption at the local level. It also leads to more polarization of the country because people, when they're still interested in news, they'll look at the national news, and the national news is focused on ideology and the division between the right and the left. And they say that studies have shown that it's contributed to the polarization in the country. I mean, when you're covering local issues, generally politics are not the uppermost thing in people's minds. It's just getting things done. And so it contributes to more of a sense of community and getting along when you can and compromise, because that's what they have to do at the local level. So, yeah, I mean, so my strength is like in-depth and investigative reporting. And I did a lot of that at the State Journal Register, but it became more and more difficult to do that as the staff was downsized. We went for one period of time, 12 years with no pay raises. I had to do freelancing work. I got a job working every weekend at a McDonald's. I did a lot to stay in the industry, but the Illinois Times is a good outlet for me. I'm still very busy, but they tend to focus on long form reporting, in-depth reporting, and investigative reporting. And it seems like the readership appreciates that. So I'm actually enjoying myself very much here. I worked with a lot of talented colleagues at the daily paper, the State Journal Register, and I would urge people to support all of their local reporting avenues. But yeah, I'm doing what I like. I really feel blessed that I'm able to do this work.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the story that you wrote. Like I said, Springfield was number 2. I know we were discussing prior to going live that who was number 1. I think you said it was Bloomington, Illinois,
right,
was number 1. So I was, so 2 Illinois cities are number 1 and number 2. I never would have thought that it would have been Bloomington, Illinois. What was one of, I guess, in your research doing this, one of the most compelling things that you found that really contribute to this wealth gap, if you will, or income gap that you found that because I think there was a study done in 2019. I think it was Governing Magazine or something like that, and here we are 6 years later, and the pendulum still hasn't moved. It's in the same spot. In your research, what did you find interesting, and I guess in terms of the needle not being moved in 6 years?
That was surprising to me, but when I talked to some experts about it, they said, well, this isn't that surprising that it hasn't moved the needle because COVID-19 was during this period, and that was reflected in the statistics. And in sociology, you always find that people at the who tend to be at the lower end of the economic scale, they're working in the service industry jobs that were most impacted by COVID. So we find that the Black community disproportionately is represented in poverty and in median household income and various different measures. And so all across the country, we saw that the needle didn't move that much. I obviously I'm white, and I can't know what Black people go through, but in talking to a lot of people who have gone through this, they say that when white America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia. So it's always accentuated. I think what I also found is that many of the downstate Illinois communities are in the same boat. We are particularly hard hit. Like, if I could just mention some of the statistics, like in the gap between median household income, that means the median, the equal distant point between the richest and the poorest in whites and Blacks, that median household income for Black households is $33,000, and in white households it's $80,000. Mm-hmm. So that's in the Springfield area, which includes Sangamon and Menard counties. That's the Springfield metro area. But so Springfield was number 1 in the nation in that gap in 2017. It was number 2 in 2023, but other ones that were high in this gap was Rockford. It was the 12th highest. Peoria was the 6th highest. Kankakee was the 15th highest gap. And in Chicago, it was the 18th highest gap. And then in other measures like the unemployment rate, in 2023, Decatur had the highest Black unemployment rate in the nation. And Springfield's Black unemployment rate was in the top 20 or so, and it was the third highest in the state. And if you also look at the poverty rate, just the Black poverty rate, in 2023, Springfield's Black poverty rate was the highest in the state. It was higher than Rockford's, Kankakee's, Bloomington, Peoria, and it was 40%, almost 41% of Black people in the Springfield area live in poverty, and the white rate is 8%. Now, you couldn't get any much more stark than this. And actually, right in the city of Springfield, there are more people who are in poverty, just pure numbers, who are Black than white. So it's even more than disproportionate. They're just pure numbers that are larger. But overall, statewide, there are more white people in poverty than Blacks, but you're much more likely to be in poverty. So the reasons for this are that there are a lot of different reasons, and nobody knows exactly why we are at the top of the heap so much. But we do know that most of these downstate communities, over the past 20, 30 years, we had a great migration of Black people come up north from the South for jobs and to escape the Jim Crow laws, but some of them still have faced informal Jim Crow laws to this day. So that happened in the earlier part of the 20th century. But what happened was that there were they were legal at the time. There were laws that prohibited realtors from showing and selling houses to Black families outside of certain zones. This happened in Springfield, Peoria, all these towns. It's called redlining. And so that resulted in people living and being confined to an area. And so what we find over the years is that level of segregation, which we also measured in our study, we found that we were among the top third of communities in the country that are the most segregated. And that results in there are some good results of that, of moral support, of comfort. But as the poverty rate increases, it means the children who are growing up and young people are less likely to see people make it out, to get better jobs, to go to school, to get a college degree, to get a trade school degree, and it reinforces the poverty. And then when you have a lot of people in poverty, you're going to see more crime because there's more desperation. And so that leads to trauma, emotional trauma that can set people back their entire lives. It's known that can take 20, 30 years off your life as far as your life expectancy. So these conditions reinforce themselves. And so it's hard to get out of that.
So when you look at, I guess, looking at it from that standpoint, you can look at the lack of non-investment, I guess, in these communities. And when you talk about redlining, and I guess there's probably a certain element of racism involved in that as well.
Definitely.
In terms of, not putting dollars or directing dollars to those communities that need it the most, even though the tax base is probably lower in those communities, and those individuals that probably pay a higher tax, probably get the better services. I mean, it's just, one of those things that, it's not unique to Springfield. It's probably the same way in other cities. When we look at the leadership in terms of some of the things that they've tried to do, I guess, here recently to address, some of these issues that are involved. I know in your article, you talked the current mayor, Mayor Busher, talked about increasing, that she was big on home ownership, and as well as trying to get more Blacks in the trades. And I would say that the trades are good, Historically, they probably have been discriminatory against blacks in Springfield. I think there was someone in your story that talked about it being a good old boy, white boys club, and where blacks were excluded out of these particular positions that were, high, good paying jobs, and gave them a good career or a skill that they could use that would be marketable, go out and do other things. So hopefully the pendulum is changing somewhat on that. I'm a firm believer in the trades. I think if you had to choose between getting a college degree and becoming a journeyman, I would take the journeyman. You go to college, there's no guarantee you're going to get a job in your field when you get out, but people always need other things done. If you're an electrician, if you're a carpenter, you're a cement layer, the wages are good. They just need to open it up to make sure that it's fair and that blacks have an opportunity, to join these unions. And, some things are loosening up from what I'm reading and seeing. So that's a good thing, to be able to, to get in these fields. When I look at also too, other contributing factors, in terms of when you talked about the redlining and, how banks make loans in particular areas and, naturally, doing things in economically depressed areas, there's more risk, but there's risk every time the bank makes a loan. So it just depends on what type of appetite that they would have, to do different things in the community. And then we start talking about development also. And I think about businesses because businesses, generate income. They employ people. And, how many businesses, when you think about the black community in Springfield and other areas, that can employ people and pay them a living wage where they can take care of themselves. It's probably not that many. I know they're not in Springfield and probably other parts of the country as well. When you, look at all of that in totality and think about, what can be done in the immediate sense, to start turning this thing around. And when you looked at that, what were some of the things or some of the, I guess, suggestions that you would make based on the research that you did that could, start turning this thing around?
Well, I think when I talk to people, they found that you shouldn't just focus on the immediate impact, trying to get immediate impacts, because one or two of the experts I talked to said two of the most proven ways of turning this around and reducing the disparities is through intensive educational efforts and intensive intervention efforts. And those take a long time, but the challenge is they also take money. So here we do in our main school district, District 186, because we're the state capital and there's so many state-owned buildings, 40% of their territory that they could tax is off the tax rolls because it's state government. It's we are home to two large hospitals. Much of their property is tax exempt, and that places even bigger burden because District 186, a majority of their kids come from families who are low income. So that's the largest of any school district in our area. And yet they face the most challenges and have in some ways, the least financial support to do it. So that's not an easy fix. In some states, there are programs where state government will help subsidize taxing bodies in the state capital. That's being pursued somewhat. But that's something that really, like I talked to the school superintendent and she said during the pandemic, there was pandemic relief money that helped them really expand their summer programs, their after school programs. And she actually said, we finally felt like we were getting enough money to deal with some of these challenges that we have. And then all that funding went away last fall. So, and then there are youth programs on the east side and some of the other poorer neighborhoods but they are really challenged in getting money. And the city council, the 3 black aldermen, have really struggled to get quick support for that from the council. And they've been somewhat successful because they're more organized now. But those are 2 things that can really have a difference. Like the Boys and Girls Club and other groups bring kids from the inner city out to colleges or field trips, or, a lot of people would be surprised that many of these kids are not exposed to a lot of different opportunities in life. And so, like, one of the moms I talked to, she was on our cover of the story, and she said that she tutors in the schools, and she asked the kids she tutors in these poor neighborhoods what they want to be when they grow up, and they all say, "Oh, well, I'd like to do this job at a supermarket, like be a cashier," which is fine. I mean, but that's what their mom does. So they only know what their parents do. They're not exposed to a lot of what else happens. So there's that option. I think you mentioned the trades. That is very true. The trades are trying to turn the corner. They know that it's been a good old boys club for decades there, especially in the building trades. And they're trying to change that because they need more people in the trades. Some of it is, I think some people are leaving behind racist attitudes, and there's just also a more market demand. So they want to fill that. So, but you have to look at higher education still. Somebody who has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, their lifetime earning potential is still much greater than somebody who has a high school diploma, or in some cases a trade. Some of the trades pay really well, really well. But so college shouldn't be dismissed. And there are, but that's another challenge, to get kids buckle down in school earlier, and that goes to the challenge of the public school system. So all of those factors need to happen. I think in the short range, the city is trying to do more, or at least several of the Alderman Sean Gregory, Lakeisha Purchase, and Roy Williams are trying to get more engagement between the Springfield Sangamon Growth Alliance, which is our economic development organization, to engage more with the city and with the community in general, to focus more development on the east side and create corridors that will be attractive for businesses to locate. So that's a current thing that's being discussed now. And this is very timely. When we did our story, we did that intentionally because we're coming out of the pandemic. There's more opportunity. Springfield was announced recently as a site for a new Amazon distribution center, which is going to create some good paying jobs. There might be a Frito-Lay plant that will generate more truck driving and warehouse jobs that pay well and don't require a college degree. So I think the answer to that is everybody's trying this, but I don't think there are any immediate solutions.
When you're looking at some of the statistical data, Springfield, there's 20% black population in Springfield, but yet they make up 50% of the students in the public school district, as well as, about 70% of all black households are headed up by single mothers.
Yes.
In Springfield, and that number is kind of constant throughout. Mm-hmm. So when we look at, I guess you can say, those particular numbers, and you talked about exposure, getting kids out, letting them see other things, because sometimes they never leave the community, they never get a chance to go out and see see how things are in other parts of the country or the world, for that matter, and they get stuck in this cycle to whereby it's a poverty cycle, and it's like it just keeps repeating itself. So I think that's very important. And they have some organizations out there, that are trying to do things. You have your college you have your sororities and your fraternities, and they try to expose kids to different things. And so there are some things out there. It's just, is it enough, to move the needle? We're in a situation now where we have a younger generation. Some of the old ideas and the old thought processes are dying off now, and hopefully, think we can just start looking at things from a different perspective, and to be able to do some things because, when you have a lifetime of poverty, it perpetuates itself because it's handed down to the next generation, to generation, and somebody has to break that cycle. Be it college, be it the trades, or starting your own business. I'm a firm believer in owning your own business. You can work a job for 30 years and do a good job. But when you go to retire, they're not going to give that job to your son. They're not going to give that job to your daughter. But if you put that same effort in a particular business, something you can pass down and, create some generational wealth and income, I think that's very important. And I also wanted to say, too, one of the biggest things that I see, and this is just me personally, and it's just in terms of the religious community, being able to work together, to pool the resources together, to do things that will create economic opportunities and create income and wealth in the Black community. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle that's really missing because every Sunday a church is taking up a collection somewhere. Every Monday they're depositing money somewhere. And if they were able to take those dollars and pool those dollars to do things that can create jobs and eliminate blight in the communities, I think, and that's me personally saying that, I think it can go a long way.
Could I just add something?
Sure.
I mean, I think personally that, I was talking to Dominic Watson, president of the Black Chamber of Commerce in Springfield. And so we had the horrendous murder of Sonia Massey a year ago. And so that caused the community to kind of spring into action of how can we reduce these situations? How can we get better training for police? How can we attract a bigger pool of police? And then there's the Massey Commission that was formed. Dominic says people have been working on parts of this problem, the disparities, for years, and he believes it takes kind of a focused effort by leaders in the community, because this is not just a Black problem. I mean, this is decline of the urban core, which you see in a lot of communities. So what you have is the people, when you have so many problems that kind of feed on themselves in the urban core, people flee, or when they come to Springfield or when they move to the edges of the community, or they'll move to the all-white suburbs or the more affluent suburbs. So that leaves the people who are remaining with fewer resources. But he said that this really has to be, so because of that situation, it's in everybody's best interest. Whites as well as Blacks, those are the main racial groups we have in Springfield, not Hispanic as much or Asian, but it's in all the leadership's best interest to have more stability economically. I mean, the problems that you see with segregation, that's specifically a Black issue with racism fueling it in the beginning. But the challenges in poor neighborhoods, that affects white people too. There are poor whites and they get in this cycle too. But you just see it more plainly. And so unfortunately, that causes a lot of white people to say, well, this is just a white problem. This is just a problem with the Black family. They have to solve this. Pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Well, like a lot of people say, there are some people who don't even have boots or don't even have straps. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to kind of dismiss this issue, that this is a lack of motivation, or it's a laziness issue, or it's it's really a racist view and a lack of understanding, a lack of compassion for your fellow man. I think in Springfield, we have the chance, because we're not a huge city, to get our arms around this problem more, because you can travel across, as you know, across the city, and it's 15 minutes. So it's not hard to see your neighbor who's in trouble. So I think that key to this is going to be various parts of the community outside the Black community willing to take the reins, because economically it makes sense. That means there's less crime, there's higher property values, that means that's more tax revenue, more people want to shop, that's more sales tax revenue, more resources for the schools. I mean, it's in everybody's best interest, but the problem is that it requires a long-term effort. It's like saying, I want to improve my health. Well, you can't. I guess you can take Ozempic. That's a short-term fix, but a lot of these social problems require intensive effort and buy-in by leadership over years. So that's the challenge that we face now. And I just hope, as a journalist, to shed light on this and prompt more discussion about it.
Yeah. When you mentioned the Alderman Gregory, Purchase, and Williams, they have formed a coalition. They have been pretty vocal about, resources, being allotted to these economically depressed areas. And, I think they're getting some traction. I think the key it is if they can, still work together and put the pressure on the council, at least being able to, to get the votes to do different things. I think it can actually, do some things to change some things, because here we are in 2025 and we're still talking about problems that were 20, 30, 40, 50 years old as it relates to, in the east side of Springfield or the Black population. So, and when I think about Springfield, it being the state capital, and you have, thousands of jobs here in the Springfield area, why is it that these numbers are the way they are when there are, I won't say an overabundance of jobs, but, about over 72% of all Black people in the United States work for government, be it school district, county, state, city. So when you have, those particular type numbers, when you look at Springfield, there are a lot of Blacks that are employed in government. But again, when you start looking at it, the whole number is kind of like, man, it might be quite a few, but, the Black community is still, in poverty here. And
right. Like, for example, 30 years ago, Fiat Alice was here. And that employed a lot of Black people. I mean, generally Blacks were the last hired, first fired, but those heavy manufacturing jobs that paid a good wage were union jobs. We had a lot of, like at Pillsbury, we still had racist hiring practices in some cases, but those jobs in a large part have gone away. And unless you go through some training program to get additional education after high school, you're going to be stuck working at a fast food place or some lower wage job. And so we saw that in Peoria as well, when there was a big decline in manufacturing. You see it across the Midwest. And as that happened, it's been documented that the loss of those jobs, which disproportionately impacted the Black community, leads to more family strife and leads to more divorce. There's a much higher divorce rate and much higher out of wedlock childbirth rate in the Black community. And that kind of all it fuels the poverty, and it's a result of the poverty. So these are big social problems that require a lot of investment. And for people who say that we've spent money on certain programs and they haven't worked, well, generally it's because they require a lot of spending. I mean, in Europe, you have income support basically for people who have a guaranteed level of income to have a decent quality of life, to have decent housing. Now they pay higher tax rates, but they don't have the homelessness issues. They don't have the eviction issues. They don't have the economic strife that of the level that we see in the United States. So we're like the home of the free and the, land of the free and the home of the brave. And we expect people to be self-sufficient. But, when Western lands were being sold off and given to immigrants who came over to have a plot of land for farming, they did that for all the immigrants, except the ones who were brought over here in chains. They didn't do that for Black people.
When you look at the numbers, in the eve of the Civil War, Black people in America had 1/2 or 1% of this country's wealth. And here we are in 2025, and Black people still have 1/2 or 1% of this country's wealth. And then we haven't moved the needle in over 150 plus years. And when I hear people talk about it, because, there are definitely racial stereotypes, and the thing people think, well, they're lazy, they don't want to work. And you made the statement about, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it was kind of like when Blacks were free and they weren't slaves anymore. They said, okay, well, you're not slaves anymore. Okay, go out and compete. Go compete with what? We don't own anything. We don't have any land. And then they were forced to be sharecroppers and, were cheated for years and years and years because, they couldn't build any traction. But, even then, there were some that were able to do some things. And, we have a long way to go. And, cities such as Springfield are, not unique in terms of some of the issues that they face, as it relates to poverty. Poor people are always going to be around. There's always going to be a certain segment of people or population that don't have anything. And what's the responsibility of the government? What's the responsibility of the community? That everybody work together to try to do some things that, to create some parity to whereby people can at least feel good about themselves and have a future, or at least their children will have a future. Because a lot of these kids that go to college, they don't want to come back to Springfield after they get out of college. They want to go to other places because there are more opportunities there, and you got more culture as well. So there are a lot of things that go into, trying to make your city better, trying to make it, fair for all individuals that are in the city, and it's just a tough thing. And I look at it from the standpoint of, this being 2025 and, a lot of the things that are going on now in the federal government, how is that going to affect some of the different things that not-for-profits that get money, that funnel those dollars down to low-income areas? Is it going to make the problems even worse? So I think some of that, remains to be seen, and how different cities or Springfield, how they'll navigate through that to make sure that, individuals that are poor individuals don't get lost in the sauce, that there's opportunities for them to be able to compete and do things. So I'm, cautiously optimistic. And again, the reason that I wanted to do this interview, not so much because of Springfield, because when I saw that Springfield was number 2 in the country, that was compelled me to say, man, this is a serious issue, in Abraham Lincoln's hometown, on top of that. And, everything's Lincoln in Springfield. And I think that as people come more accustomed to working with other people, exposed and helping get other individuals get exposed to things, what's the old expression, yard by yard is hard, but inch by inch is a cinch. So hopefully we can be able to move the needle and do some things for the next generation that's coming up, that they'll have better hope and, want to stay around Springfield and make it a better place to live and be able to raise a family and do different things like that. When you look at, the lack of investment, over the years, what type of dollars have been poured into, the economically depressed areas. You have TIF districts, that create, revenue from incremental improvements that are made in properties, and those dollars being able to be utilized to do things these economic depressed. It's one of the best pieces of legislation that I ever saw come out of the city of Springfield, I believe it was former Alderman Turner and Gregory had worked together to put together something on the cannabis money that comes in that really helps businesses, by giving them grants or doing things that to be able to grow their business, hopefully to the point that it can be a scalable business to be able to employ people and help to, bridge some income gaps. So, and I think that under the current mayor, I think that they're still doing the program, which I think is good, in my opinion, that it can, really help. Because I think you have to be on the east side of Springfield or on the census tract, which is probably east side of Springfield. So there's a net effect that it could actually help do some things as it relates to the income equality, because now I guess you're talking businesses, but businesses employ people, and people that are employed make money, people that are employed spend money. So I think it's very important that they keep a program like that intact. And government can't be the answer to everything, but I think they can play a role in some of these areas to whereby they can be the catalyst, if you will, to spur some things on it. It create some wealth or create some, start closing that gap. When you start talking about, was it 30,000, 33,000 and 80,000? Mm-hmm. That's a big gap. That's a big gap.
I think you can make the argument that, government can't do anything. But the thing is that both the federal government and local governments, redlining is illegal now, but you could make the argument that the government is a big reason why we have these disparities. And so there are some communities, even in Illinois, that have looked at reparations, which I know is a very controversial topic. There are things that are done with income support, and a couple communities in the Chicago area are doing that. There's debate about increasing the minimum wage, which Illinois has done, but that has impacts on businesses as well. So I think that people in the city government, I think these statistics help light a fire under them. We've never had 3 aldermen on the city council. That's 1/3 of the council, and 20% of the people are in Springfield are Black. But you can look at it the other way. For our last 150 years, we've had white people in control. So you just have this larger than normal amount, and so they have kind of a platform. But it's hard to change practices because cities don't have a lot of money. They are focused on bricks and mortar. They're not a social service agency. And for instance, of the local share of cannabis taxes, half of it the council decided half of it they're going to use for police and fire pensions, because police and fire pensions take up all of the city property taxes that go to city government, even actually more than that. So some communities don't even have, don't even use their cannabis money in the Black community. They use it for other things. So Springfield has been progressive in that regard. And I think there's a cadre of people who really do care who are white. But it's just trying to turn the Titanic around. It's just hard to do. And with limited resources, I think it's going to require a sustained effort over decades. Yeah. But why not start now? Why not use this opportunity and these statistics and the fact that things haven't changed to kind of recalibrate? There are positive things going on in the city, going with economic development right now. We're going to have the sports park, the Shield Sports Park opening. That's going to draw lots of new tourism dollars to the community. There's more downtown development that's coming potentially. But it's just, there needs to be a lot more of everything done.
Yeah. In your research, and I guess in talking with individuals, I'm curious to, what were some of the comments or some of the suggestions that maybe certain individuals, I know you said you talked to Dominic from the Black Chamber, who's very creative and very aggressive in this approach, and I think he gets it in terms of what needs to be done, and some of the things that he's trying to implement, I think, are great. But in some of the other conversations that you've had, what has been their take on what needs to be done, or how they can play a role in doing some things that that can eliminate some of these disparities?
Well, some people I've talked to have been critical of the city uh, because over the years they haven't used some economic development tools that have been available to other communities, like creating using TIF dollars and other economic development tools to create more corridors that are friendly to business, because businesses are attracted to sites that have been made attractive to them, so they don't have to do as much work. And the challenge in Springfield is that we do not have a city manager form of government. It's the mayor and the city council. The city council can change over every 4 years. The mayor can change over every 4 years. As a result of that, the new mayor often brings in a new economic development director. They could create a city administrator without changing the federal consent decree that created our aldermanic form of government, but they haven't done that. And so there are certain things that hold us back here because things change over so often, and we have a lot of the professionals that could provide balance and a more steady hand in development. They change over. That's just our form of government, and they haven't decided to have a full-time city administrator who's a professional, who really knows economic development and has gone to school for it. Other options could come through what's called the Recompete grant. The city received a large grant to study and prepare for an implementation grant to do more development in the impoverished areas of town, like whole block development. The problem is that the actual implementation will require millions of dollars more. And we have Donald Trump, who's now in office, who said that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are a non-starter. And so that's created a tremendous amount of anxiety and among organizations, especially in cities that are trying to correct inequities and deal with disinvestment, because those can be labeled as DEI. And so I don't know if people realized all these ramifications, but ideology and elections do matter. I know the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, she backslid with support from Black people, especially Black men. So, I mean, these are not easy issues to resolve. It's a political situation. It's a moral situation. It's just a local funding situation. And a lot of people want to do good work, but it's depending on our government and our officials at the federal, local, and state level to help, to be pulling in the same direction, basically.
Yeah. And when I thought about partnerships, what type of partnerships can be created that can, when you think about Springfield, you got the big two, you got the hospitals and you got state government. Government even in itself is cumbersome. All the regulations and rules you have to jump through, as opposed to having private individuals that want to come in and invest dollars in these particular areas. And you look at what people spend their money on, how, when going back to, I want to really go back and talk about housing, which is a wealth generator, which, helps to close the income gap when you own a home where you have equity, where you can do things and, pull out dollars, invest them, do different things. And one of the things I thought about, and I know they do this in some other cities, whereby individuals that want to, builders that build brand new homes in economically depressed areas, that the cities will put up anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 in grants that will go to the homeowners that want to buy these particular homes that they can use towards down payment of these homes. And what it does, it increases the tax base. It brings some stability because these individuals would have to stay there 5 to 10 years because, with a grant, a certain portion of that money is forgiven, over a course in time. But when you have a limited pot of money that you're working with, when you start looking at, okay, what does the city get the revenues from? Well, from sales tax, from property taxes. No politician wants to raise taxes. It's almost like a nail in the coffin. But, where do you get these resources from outside of private individuals that want to come in and invest in the community that can, help to, create these economic opportunities? And I think that's the age-old question because, all communities are looking for the same thing. Manufacturing is big. Communities will, roll out the red carpet, to get manufacturing because it's not a skilled job, but if it pays a decent wage, you can still take care of yourself. If two parties are working there and they're making $20-$25 an hour, you could buy a home if you can afford it now because the cost of homes are so much. But I think things of that nature, and that's where the economic development pieces come in because they have what is the Sangamon Growth Alliance, and then they have the Economic Development Department for the city of Springfield. So I don't know how those two work together, to create opportunities or to go out and, who does the marketing, because it seems to me like the Growth Alliance is, pretty much taking the lead from what I see and what I read. And it might not be the case, but, what's the function of the Economic Development Department and how do they work hand in hand?
Well, the Economic Development Department, the city has the right, and the Growth Alliance doesn't have the right to direct these economic development tools like enterprise zones, TIF districts, federal grants, community development block grants. That's the city. So the SSGA can work with the city on that. But you mentioned housing. There are some major initiatives on that, like the Nehemiah Homes, directed by Pastor Silas Johnson on the east side. They got approval recently from the Illinois Housing Development Authority, IDA, to do their latest expansion of affordable homes that they build on the east side and that they rent to provide affordable rents. And the people who live there eventually have the option to buy the homes. Now that program's been around for over 10 years, and some of the homes are starting to go up on the market to be sold. So that's the long-term goal. But keep in mind, you have to have the income to be able to pay house payments. You can talk about making home ownership more affordable, but unless you have a job to support the mortgage payments, right, that's kind of like a misnomer. So there are a lot of efforts right now to improve it. I think there's also criticism that the city and others have not been aggressive enough to grasp these problems and really take them by the horns. And but there's more attention to it now more than ever, especially since these statistics come out and they're kind of forced to deal with it.
Yeah. When you talk about housing, back in my former life, I was a developer of the Eastview Estates subdivision in Springfield. And when we took on that project, our main goal was to see how can we get individuals in the homes? What can we do to ensure that individuals are able to afford a home and to buy a home? And I know when we did that project, we worked with the Illinois Housing Development Authority, was IDA. And at the time, this is 20 years ago, interest rates were 9%. But we were able to get IDA to come in and offer a fixed 5% interest for individuals that wanted to buy homes in the development. And we only have to put down 3%. And then we approached the city and got the city to agree to put down 2%. And so from that point, we tried to find individuals that were renting, because you've been renting and you're paying $900 a month, $1,000 a month. Our philosophy was, if we can get you in the house for the same payment that you're paying for rent, now you have an opportunity to create some equity, to create some income and create some wealth down the road. 20, 30 years from now, that house is paid for, or you pass on, you leave it to your kids. So now, they have an opportunity with an asset to be able to go out and do some things. And that project, worked out really pretty well. Nobody in that, I think it might have been one home in that whole subdivision that defaulted. And several of those individuals over there own their homes now, and they have equity, it worth a couple $100,000. And it was a good project. So I think that when you talked about, being able to afford a home, that's where you got to have a job. $30,000 is not going to buy you a home anywhere.
And pay the property taxes.
Yeah, exactly.
Which in a lot of parts of Springfield are like $6,000 and $7,000 a year.
Yeah. So, so it's a work in progress, and I'm so glad that you wrote this story and that you pointed some things out. And it seems to me like some of the stories that you're writing are going in and trying to address and look at some of these issues that are out there to try to do, what can be done to make it better. I think there was an article came out today where you did a story on the alderman. I think there was something you might have done about traffic stops or something like that as well. So, when you put this information out there, it forces people to be able to, well, I guess you can, to start dialogue. When I saw this, I don't know if you've been on any other radio shows or anything else in Springfield talking about this article, or if it's one of those things that nobody wants to talk about it. But I thought, hey, we want to at least bring you on and let you talk about it and start letting other people know about it. So, and I know we've been going for about an hour now, Dean, and normally I try to keep the show for about an hour or less. Do you have anything else you want to add or say or address that we didn't talk about?
Well, if I'm working on future stories that are offshoots of this, potentially looking at how disparities continue to affect education, health, and what's being done to resolve it. The Illinois Times is interested in all these issues, and we're going to keep focusing on it. I would encourage any of your viewers, if they have story ideas, to contact me, and they can contact me by email, which is D as in dog, Olsen, Olsen, at illinoistimes.com, or call me. My office number is 217-679-7810. And just feel free to make suggestions of story ideas that they would like to see done, or if something's happening to them that they think might be newsworthy. I'm always looking for story ideas, and so we find that the readers of the paper are really interested in their community. There are people who care. It's just I think our role as journalists is to put a spotlight on important issues and to try to hold, especially our elected officials, to account. And I think they appreciate the coverage, both positive and negative, because I think that helps many of them who care about this community, helps them get support for what they want to do.
Yeah. Well, I think the media is very important. Again, looking at your bio, I saw that, you've actually had stories that have been out there in the national news as well. So, this particular type of story would play, anywhere else in the country, in terms of getting it out there. And I probably don't know if you knew it about in a former life also, I published a newspaper, the Capital City Courier. And we did that for about 10 years. And when we talked about some of these particular type issues that, they weren't being covered in mainstream media. And, we had a good run at it, and we were able to, talk about stuff that nobody wanted to talk about, or just just kind of like, well, they looked the other way, and we kind of shook the rug, if you will. So, and it looks like you're doing the same thing at the Illinois Times, and I commend you for that, because we need individuals such as yourself that are willing to go out there and talk about these things, because a lot of times people don't want to talk about it. Even they know it exists, but they just, okay, well, maybe it'll just go away. So I commend you for having the gumption, to write these particular type stories and to, to shed light on them. So, and, you and Bud over there. So I just think it's good, and, keep up the good work. And, I enjoy reading your columns, and, if anything that I can ever do, or if you ever want to come back on the show and talk about stuff, you have an open invitation. So
thanks very much. And thanks for what you do. Yeah.
Well, we're going to go ahead and end the show right now. You've been listening to the Real Mike Pittman Podcast with Dean Olsen, writer for the Illinois Times newspaper in Springfield, Illinois, who wrote a story on the inequality, if you will, as it relates to income gaps between blacks and whites in Springfield, Illinois, which is Springfield is number 2 in the country. And he's really shed some light on some things, and he's going to keep moving forward. So, Dean, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. And, we will definitely be in touch, and I look forward to continue reading your stories.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. You take care, and we'll go ahead and we'll end this show right now. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Okay.